Have you ever felt inexplicably exhausted after talking to someone, like your mind was fine when you arrived, but by the end, you could barely think straight? As if something invisible had drained you, left you disoriented, doubting yourself, unsure of what was real. It didn't happen with screaming. There was no fight, no insult, no clear offense. And that's what makes it so dangerous. That's how evil enters your life. Not with a loud bang, but with a whisper. A smile. A gentle tone. This isn't a ghost story. It's far more terrifying, because it's real. It hides behind compliments, under the disguise of helpfulness, inside the voice of someone who says they care. And once you realize what's happening, you might already be in too deep. When I first met Emily, I didn't just trust her. I admired her. We were both working at a rising tech startup in Austin, Texas, and her presence was magnetic. She had this way of making you feel like you mattered, like your ideas were brilliant, like you were part of something bigger. She often praised my work during team meetings. "You always bring such fresh thinking," she said once with a smile that made the whole room turn toward me. It lit something inside me, a small fire of pride, recognition. That's what I thought friendship looked like. But then, small things began to shift. It started subtly. A suggestion here, a little doubt there. "Hey, I just wanted to give you a heads up. I think you might have confused the numbers in your last report," she'd whisper. "Just thought you'd want to know before anyone else catches it." At first, I was grateful. She was looking out for me, right? Until I realized she was the one bringing it up to the manager in private, and the confusion wasn't even real. One day, she offered to look over my presentation. I said yes, hoping to improve it. Later, I found out she'd rewritten whole sections behind my back, then told our supervisor I wasn't ready to present alone. What do you call someone who praises you in public but sows doubt in private? Who makes you feel valued only so they can slowly dismantle your confidence? That's not support. That's control. This is what philosophers like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus warned us about. Not through magic or superstition, but through the quiet theft of our autonomy. They called for clarity, for awareness, for guarding our minds. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And manipulation, true, sustained manipulation, erodes your mastery without you even knowing it. I wish I could tell you I caught it early. I didn't. I spent months spiraling in self-doubt, questioning every choice I made, running my decisions through Emily before taking action. I believed she was helping me. I thought she cared. But what she really cared about was control. My growth threatened her position. So she buried it beneath a blanket of false concern. That's the thing about constant manipulation. It's not about one big betrayal. It's about the slow, deliberate erosion of your self-trust. The kind that makes you shrink yourself just to feel safe. I got out. Not by confronting her, not with drama. I just stopped needing her approval. I documented my work, trusted my instincts, and reclaimed the parts of me that had been quietly silenced. And with time, her power faded. This is your reminder. Not everyone who claps for you wants you to win. Some people clap just loud enough to drown out your own instincts. Manipulation thrives in silence, in doubt, in your need to be seen, but you can break free. If this message speaks to something you felt but couldn't name, subscribe to this channel. Your support is the reason we keep creating videos that shine light into the shadows, and we've got so much more to uncover together. Now, I want to hear from you. Let's do a quick check-in. Question: if someone constantly compliments you in public but makes you question yourself in private, what do you think that is? A. Genuine support with a tough love approach. B. Manipulation disguised as care. Drop your answer in the comments. A or B? I'm reading every one of them. Let's start this conversation together. You know that feeling when someone seems too perfect? It's not just their words, it's the way they say them. Their voice feels like velvet. Their compliments? Flawless. Their timing? Impeccable. They look you in the eye and say exactly what your soul wants to hear, and for a moment, you believe it all. You drop your guard, even just a little, because charm like that feels real, feels safe. But sometimes charm is a mask. And when you finally see what's underneath, it's already too late. I met Lucas during a week-long mindfulness retreat in Sedona, Arizona. He wasn't the official leader of the program, but you wouldn't know it from the way people gravitated toward him. Tall, calm, and full of warmth, Lucas had a kind of effortless charisma that made strangers open up like they'd known him for years. He greeted everyone with intention, remembered the smallest details about our stories, and always had just the right words to say. "You have an old soul," he told me one evening as we walked under the stars. "I can feel it. You're meant to lead others." I'd never told anyone I was struggling with direction in my life. Somehow he just knew, or so I thought. As the days passed, small inconsistencies began to appear. He told one group he studied under a revered monk in Thailand for 3 years, then later told another he'd been in Nepal during that same time. When someone casually mentioned a neuroscience concept, Lucas nodded and added, "Oh, I wrote a paper on that during my time at MIT." But when asked about it again, he couldn't remember the topic. Still, people laughed off the contradictions. He was charming, generous, enlightened, right? What I didn't know then was that his charm wasn't warmth, it was armor. It protected a carefully crafted illusion. On the 4th day of the retreat, I sat in on a small group session where Lucas guided us through a meditation. It was strikingly well organized, except it wasn't his design. I recognized the exact structure from a PDF another facilitator, Jenna, had emailed us weeks before. He didn't acknowledge her, not once. Later, when I gently brought it up, he smiled. Must be some overlap. Great minds think alike, right? Then he changed the subject, with a joke so clever I forgot why I brought it up in the first place. That's the danger of the mask. When someone wears it well, you begin to question yourself instead of them. You rewrite what you see to fit the version they've sold you. It's not just deceit, it's performance. Lucas's lies weren't chaotic. They were elegant, precise, designed not to shock, but to blur the lines between fact and fiction just enough that you stop trusting your own eyes. This is what Stoic philosophers warned us about, not just liars, but those who manipulate truth as a tool to gain admiration, control, and immunity. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." But people like Lucas don't show you their thoughts. They show you a painted version of who they want to be and hope you'll mistake it for soul. By the end of the retreat, stories began surfacing. Half-truths, silent betrayals. Jenna confronted him, not with anger, but with undeniable facts. He didn't argue. He smiled, packed his bags, left early. That's when the spell broke. In the silence that followed, I replayed every word he had said to me, every compliment, every insight, and I felt it. The weight of something false. The lesson hit hard. Real goodness doesn't need to dazzle. It doesn't need applause. And it certainly doesn't take credit for work that isn't its own. The truth is, genuine people don't wrap their worth in performance. Their kindness doesn't shift when no one's watching. Their stories hold up when the spotlight moves. So how do we protect ourselves? We slow down. We ask quiet questions. We match words to actions. And when something feels too perfect, we lean in, not with suspicion, but with clarity. Lucas taught me more than he realized, not through his guidance, but through his deceit. He reminded me that charm is only valuable when it's paired with integrity, because no matter how polished someone appears, it's their character in the shadows that tells you who they really are. Some friendships don't end with a fight. They unravel in silence, slowly, like a thread pulling loose from a sweater, barely noticeable at first, until suddenly, nothing fits the way it used to. Jordan and I had been best friends since we were 12. We grew up in the same Chicago neighborhood, rode bikes down cracked sidewalks, shared secrets on long walks home from school. Through college, careers, heartbreaks, we stayed close. Or so I believed. It wasn't one moment that changed everything. It was dozens of small ones, subtle, quiet, yet undeniable in hindsight. I remember calling Jordan one night after a brutal week at work. I'd just been passed over for a promotion I'd poured myself into. and I needed to talk to someone who knew me before the world became complicated. I told him everything, my disappointment, my self-doubt, the way I was spiraling in my own mind. He listened. Then, without missing a beat, said, "You think that's bad?" My manager dumped a whole project on me with zero notice. I've been drowning too. I told myself he was just venting, that maybe he didn't know what to say, but it kept happening. Every time I opened up, he redirected the spotlight. My vulnerability became a backdrop for his performance. Empathy, the space where connection should bloom, was replaced with indifference, or worse, competition. It took me months to admit it, but Jordan didn't want to understand me. He wanted to manage me. I started noticing how his advice, once comforting, had an edge to it now. "Are you sure you're ready for that kind of role?" he asked when I considered a job offer. "I don't think it's really your style." It sounded like concern, but it landed like control. I stopped sharing. He started questioning why. "You don't talk to me like you used to," he said once, half joking, and I remember thinking, because I'm not allowed to just be. Every conversation became a negotiation between what I felt and what I was permitted to express. This is what happens when empathy vanishes and is replaced by quiet domination. It's not the kind of control that shouts. It whispers. It shows up in carefully chosen words, well-timed skepticism, and the subtle dismantling of your confidence until you can't tell if you're being protected or restrained. Stoic philosophy reminds us that our minds are our domain. Epictetus wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." But how do you master yourself when someone you trust begins to shape your thoughts without you realizing it? Control doesn't always come from authority. It can come from intimacy, from someone who knows your insecurities, your dreams, your fears, and slowly uses them to steer you. And when that control is masked as care, it becomes nearly impossible to detect. The real tragedy isn't just losing the friendship. It's losing the part of yourself that once felt safe in it. Eventually, I created distance. I didn't make a scene or write a dramatic farewell. I simply stopped seeking his opinion on things that mattered to me. I stopped giving him the script to my life. And when I did, I realized how much of my voice I had been handing over to someone else. We still talk occasionally, but something essential is gone, and that's okay. Sometimes the deepest act of love is letting go of the person who no longer sees you clearly, or worse, who sees you and quietly chooses to keep you small. Empathy is not just listening, it's the ability to hold space for someone else without needing to fill it with your own noise, without needing to control the outcome of their story. When it's missing, relationships stop being safe. They become transactional, conditional. The hunger for control doesn't always look like domination. It can look like friendship, like advice, like protection. But underneath, it's fear. The fear that if you grow, you might leave, so they keep you close, not to support you, but to contain you. Don't stay small to make someone else comfortable. You are not a puzzle piece in someone else's picture. You are the whole frame. And the people who truly love you will never ask you to shrink to fit their view. Some relationships fade, some shift, some need to end. What matters most is that you don't lose yourself in the process. Some people never raise their voices. They never make a scene or throw accusations across the room. They don't need to. They've mastered the quiet art of blame, disguised as concern, coded in innocence, delivered with a smile. Claire was one of the most talented people I'd ever worked with. We met while collaborating on an immersive art exhibit in New York City, a high-stakes, highly visible project involving dozens of creatives. Claire was magnetic. Her ideas were brilliant. Her enthusiasm contagious. She had this effortless way of bringing people together. In the beginning, I admired her. I trusted her. I even defended her when others expressed doubts. But it didn't take long before something began to shift. A supplier missed a deadline, and Claire casually said, "Didn't you confirm the order last week? I thought you were handling that." I had. In fact, she'd been the one who changed the date in the shared file. Still, I found myself apologizing, second-guessing, checking my own memory like maybe I really had dropped the ball. Then it happened again. And again, a lighting setup was misaligned, and she raised her hand during the meeting to say, "I mentioned we needed to double-check that section, but maybe it got lost in the shuffle." Her tone was soft, almost regretful. Everyone nodded. I stood there feeling exposed and confused. Claire never yelled. She didn't point fingers. She just planted seeds of doubt, of misdirection, of partial truths. And every time something went wrong, those seeds bloomed into quiet suspicion toward me. This is the game of deflection. It's a survival mechanism for those who refuse to be held accountable, who fear what honesty might cost them. They build reputations on grace and creativity, but in moments of friction, they vanish from responsibility like smoke through fingers. Stoic wisdom tells us that truth stands without defense. Seneca wrote, "The truth stands firm without justification, but lies always require elaborate stories to sustain them." And that's exactly what Claire did. She spun narratives, layered just enough doubt into her words to make you wonder if maybe you were overreacting. That's what makes blame games so insidious. You're not just dealing with dishonesty, you're dealing with manipulation of perception. It's not about proving they're right, it's about making sure no one can prove they're wrong. At one point, I decided to quietly track communications, emails, meeting notes, decisions, not to catch her in a lie, but to find my own clarity. And the moment I did, the patterns became impossible to ignore. I remember confronting her calmly during a planning session. "I think there's been some miscommunication about the vendor issue," I said, showing the timeline and her edits. She looked at me, smiled, and replied, "Oh, I didn't realize you were keeping track of all that. That's a bit much, don't you think?" Not "I'm sorry," not "you're right." Just subtle shaming for trying to preserve the truth. It was then that I realized people like Claire don't avoid blame because they're innocent. They avoid it because they've learned how to survive without ever being touched by consequence. Their method? Turn accountability into accusation. Make you feel defensive for even bringing up the truth. Shift the focus from what they did to how you're handling it. Suddenly, you're not discussing facts. You're defending your tone, your intentions, your sanity. That's how evil hides behind innocence. It doesn't scream. It suggests. It tilts its head and says, "I'm just trying to help." And if you're not paying attention, you'll believe it. Blame games create emotional exhaustion. You start over-explaining, over-apologizing. You begin to censor yourself in meetings, to anticipate what might go wrong before you even act. You live in fear of being the fall guy again. That's not work. That's psychological warfare. Eventually, I stopped trying to prove anything. I stood by the facts, spoke them plainly, and refused to get caught in the web of over-explaining. I realized I didn't need Claire's validation, or anyone else's, to protect my integrity. And once I did that, the spell broke. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be one." That quote anchored me. It reminded me that while others are busy crafting illusions, I have the power to walk in truth, unapologetically. So here's what I've learned. If someone consistently avoids accountability, it's not an accident. It's a pattern. And no matter how gentle their voice or how innocent their demeanor, if their mistakes always land in your lap, they are not your teammate. They're your liability. Protect your peace. Let the facts speak. And when necessary, walk away. Not because you're weak, but because your energy deserves better than cleaning up messes you didn't make. There's something unnerving about the way some people smile at the wrong moments. Not when you share joy, but when you show pain. A smirk during your struggle. A spark of delight when you stumble. It's not just indifference, it's pleasure. And when you finally see it for what it is, it leaves you cold. Vincent had a magnetic presence, the kind of charisma that made rooms shift. We met during an international work exchange in London. He was quick-witted, socially fluent, and always knew exactly what to say to make people laugh. I admired him at first, as did nearly everyone else. He seemed to carry a kind of effortless confidence, like the world bent slightly in his favor. But that charm had teeth. It started with little things. A coworker tripped walking into the meeting room, and Vincent chuckled, quietly but unmistakably. "Well, coordination's not for everyone," he whispered, barely loud enough for anyone else to hear. The room moved on. I laughed awkwardly, too uncertain to call it out. Then came the gossip. He'd pull me aside after meetings, his tone casual, like we were in on something together. "Did you notice how Susan stammered through her pitch? I mean, she's nice, but let's be honest, she's not built for leadership. At first I thought it was harmless venting, maybe even a test of trust. But eventually I realized the pattern. He didn't lift people, he dissected them. He didn't challenge mistakes to improve things. He relished them, as if they proved some point about his own superiority. Then it turned toward me. I had a presentation that didn't land well. A few technical glitches, a couple of awkward moments. Afterward, Vincent leaned over and said, "Don't worry, we all have bad days. Just maybe prep more next time." He smiled, encouraging on the surface. But I saw it then, the slight raise of his brow, the flicker in his eyes. It wasn't compassion, it was satisfaction. That's when it hit me. Some people feed off of discomfort. They don't seek growth, they seek leverage. Your pain makes them feel powerful. And if they can be the one who sees your weakness first, it gives them the upper hand. The most disturbing part? He started isolating me, but not with obvious tactics. It was more like erosion. "I wouldn't share that with Jason," he'd say. "He's not as discreet as you think." Or, "I'm just saying, not everyone here wants you to succeed." One by one, I started pulling back from people who'd never wronged me, because Vincent had cast doubt on them before I ever had the chance to decide for myself. That's what makes isolation such an effective weapon. It doesn't always look like exile. Sometimes it looks like concern, like protection. But it strips you of your allies until the only person left in your corner is the one who's cornered you. Stoic philosophy teaches us to be discerning about who we keep close. Epictetus warned, "Associate with those who make you better." But how do you define better when someone convinces you that your doubt is discernment, your fear is insight? Vincent never raised his voice, never insulted anyone to their face. That's what made it so effective. He wore decency like a costume, weaponized humor as a scalpel, and always stayed just far enough from the edge that no one could point to a clear wrong. But harm doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. By the time I realized what had been happening, I felt emotionally depleted, distanced from colleagues I once trusted, second-guessing not just my choices but my own worth. And that's when I decided to step back, not just from him, but from the whole dynamic. I started reconnecting with the people he warned me about, and to my surprise, they welcomed me. No resentment, no cold shoulders, just curiosity and, in some cases, quiet concern. Turns out I wasn't the only one he'd tried to isolate, so I broke the silence. I started naming things, subtly but clearly. "Hey, I don't think that was helpful," I said once, when he made a joke at someone else's expense. He brushed it off, of course, but he also stopped including me in his private commentaries. The distance I feared actually became my freedom. It took time to rebuild what had been quietly dismantled. But once I did, I felt a clarity I hadn't known in months. There will always be people who find joy in others' missteps, who mask cruelty as cleverness, who use your loneliness to pull you closer, only to feed off your need to belong. Don't let that smile fool you. Real connection isn't built on secrets or side comments. It's built on shared growth, mutual respect, and people who feel bigger when you shine, not smaller. When someone delights in your pain or turns you against, the people who care don't shrink to fit their version of the world. Step out, speak up, and remember, you were never meant to walk alone. Some wounds don't bleed. They show up in quieter ways, in words that sound supportive but sting underneath, in glances that linger too long when you succeed, in the subtle shifts that happen when you begin to outgrow someone who never expected you to. Sometimes the person trying to hold you back isn't a stranger. Sometimes it's someone who once cheered the loudest until your light started to outshine theirs. Grace had always been one of the hardest workers in our San Francisco office. She was meticulous, humble, and the kind of person who never took shortcuts. But it wasn't her work ethic that made people notice. It was the quiet strength with which she carried herself. She had ideas, vision, and heart. And that made her dangerous to someone like her supervisor. He praised her often, always just enough to keep her close. "That was solid work," he'd say, "but you'll get there. Still a few things to polish." He'd reference others in the department, less capable but louder, making sure Grace understood that while she was talented, she still needed guidance. What she didn't see at first, and what most of us missed, was that his feedback wasn't about growth. It was control, dressed up as mentorship, a way to keep her small, because Grace had something he didn't, potential that wasn't dependent on him. The truth came into focus the day she was nominated for a cross-departmental leadership initiative. It was a big deal. Everyone expected her name to be on the short list. She had the skills, the respect, the track record, but she wasn't selected, not even as an alternate. When she asked why, her supervisor shrugged. "You're great at what you do, Grace, but some people just fit better in those roles." Later, she found out he had raised concerns about her readiness during the selection review. Nothing official, just enough to plant seeds. That's how jealousy hides, in disguise, behind smiles, beneath vague encouragement. It doesn't always look like rivalry. Sometimes it pretends to protect you, while quietly making sure you never rise too far. Grace was stunned, hurt, but not broken. She went home that night and, for the first time in months, opened a copy of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations that had been gathering dust on her bookshelf. One line leapt out at her. "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." It was a reminder that her future didn't belong to anyone's opinions, not even those who seemed to care. Over the weeks that followed, she started documenting more, speaking up more, asking hard questions. She applied for the next opening without telling anyone. When she made it through the first round, her supervisor congratulated her with a hollow grin and said, "Didn't expect them to pick someone, so reserved. But hey, surprised me." And when she eventually got the role, he didn't say a word. Not, "I'm proud of you." Not, "I was wrong." Just silence. That's the other sign. The unrepentant heart. Some people are so invested in being right, they can't admit when they're wrong, even when the evidence is staring them in the face. They justify, deflect, or disappear. But what they never do is grow. Grace did. She realized that seeking validation from someone committed to minimizing her was like asking the wind to stand still. She stopped trying to prove herself. She started showing up for herself. What makes someone truly dangerous isn't just their jealousy, it's their refusal to reflect, to change, to own the harm they cause. That's the root of evil, not rage, but pride that refuses to bend. Stoicism teaches us that strength isn't about domination, it's about self-mastery. And Grace, without even knowing it, was becoming the very thing her supervisor feared. A woman who couldn't be controlled by someone else's limits. She didn't fight him. She didn't try to convince him, she simply outgrew him. And that's the most powerful act of all. Reclaiming your power doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it's quiet. It's choosing not to internalize the words of people. Too afraid to evolve. It's walking away without slamming the door. It's living so fully that those who tried to shrink you become a footnote in your story, not the author. Your light will always threaten those hiding in shadow. Let it. Your growth will make insecure hearts uncomfortable. Grow anyway. Not everyone deserves access to your journey, especially those who try to hold you back under the illusion of protecting you. Jealousy doesn't get to write your future, and the unrepentant don't get to dictate your worth. So keep rising, keep choosing clarity over approval, and above all, stay loyal to your own becoming. That's the Stoic path, and it's yours to walk freely. Grace's story is more than a series of unfortunate encounters. It's a mirror held up to the quiet, often invisible ways emotional harm creeps into our lives. Through her journey, we witnessed how evil doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes it wears a friendly face, speaks softly, and hides behind compliments. From Emily's manipulation to Lucas's charm, Jordan's lack of empathy, Claire's blame games, Vincent's dark delight, and her supervisor's jealousy, Grace experienced it all. Each person chipped away at her trust, her confidence, her voice. But with each cut, she chose not to break. She chose to see clearly, reflect deeply, and take back control. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It took small, intentional steps. First questioning the way she felt after each interaction, then noticing the patterns, and finally daring to believe she deserved more. She started with doubt but ended in sovereignty. She stopped asking for permission to grow. She stopped explaining her worth, and in doing so, she exposed the deepest truth. Your light is not a threat. It's your strength. Her journey echoed the timeless lessons of Stoic philosophy, that we cannot control how others treat us, but we can control how we respond. That our mind, once mastered, becomes our sanctuary. That truth doesn't need validation, and self-respect doesn't need applause. She showed us that being calm doesn't mean being passive, and setting boundaries doesn't mean being unkind. It means choosing yourself when no one else does. The real villain in Grace's story wasn't one person. It was the subtle erosion of self-worth. But the real hero was the part of her that refused to vanish. That's what you take with you. Now, so what do we learn? We learn that the most dangerous people aren't the ones who yell or fight. They're the ones who smile as they silence you, who praise you while they plant seeds of doubt. Evil doesn't just lie, it performs. But it can only thrive in darkness, in your silence, in your confusion. Once you see it clearly, you take away its power. And in your own life, maybe now's the time to ask the hard questions. Who in your circle makes you feel smaller when you share your wins? Who questions your judgment under the guise of guidance? Who only shows up when you're struggling, but disappears when you shine? It doesn't mean you have to confront them, but you do need to see them. You deserve people who celebrate your growth, not just tolerate it. Who respect your boundaries, not just test them. Who hold you with care, not control. That's how you reclaim your power, not through revenge, through clarity, through choosing peace over pleasing, through walking away without guilt and moving forward without fear. Now let's turn it over to you. If someone constantly gives you backhanded compliments and undermines your confidence, what should you do? A. Keep trying to prove your worth until they respect you. B. Recognize the pattern and begin setting boundaries. Comment your answer below, A or B. And let's see how many of you are seeing the signs now. What's your perspective on this story? Have you ever experienced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's learn from each other. And if this story spoke to you, if it helped you see something more clearly, subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the fuel to keep creating meaningful content that brings the Stoic lens into everyday life. We've only just begun.